Now, the Taliban regained control of Afghanistan in August 2021, and in the 3 years since then, the situation for women's rights has deteriorated rapidly, dramatically. So many gains were made over 2 decades, and yet they fell away so quickly. They seem to evaporate, some of them, overnight. Now, bans on girls attending secondary schools and universities has seen a staggering 80% of school-age girls and young women out of school in 2023, including nearly 30% of girls never attending primary school. There's also been other restrictions in terms of dress requirements, in terms of women's economic and political participation, and repression, regression, including increased gender-based violence. So can you please provide us with an update on the human rights situation for women in Afghanistan?
It's such a big question, and there's so many layers to it as well. So similar to what Nos was saying, the situation in Afghanistan, similarly in Iran, the authoritarian government putting these systematic repressions on women, on their freedom of movement, on education, on their access to a lot of things, and it's not important to put it in context that the humanitarian crisis and the gender crisis that is happening currently, it's affecting Afghanistan as a whole. Women are the most vulnerable and the most affected by it, but Afghanistan as a whole, its economy, its infrastructure. We've got a couple of some words here regarding, the way that the industries and reconstruction and infrastructure is all collapsed. Businesses have collapsed. Women-led businesses have particularly collapsed. Climate change is a very big issue as well in Afghanistan. There's actually with a lot of drought and floods recently that have absolutely wiped down communities in regional areas. As I mentioned, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, they're very, very big issues. Men are also facing restrictions though as well. So in this context, I guess the religious imposed rules of not being for women not to get education, those restrictions are also for men as well. So for men who are actually supporting women, they are targeted as well. When the universities were banned for women in Afghanistan, for not only universities but girls from grade 6 onwards, so they couldn't when that ban was enforced. A lot of boys, a lot of men, they decided they're not going to go to universities. Those men that decided they weren't going to go, they were targets. In support of them.
Wow.
So in resistance to what to the banning of their sisters, the banning of the way that the women are experiencing restrictions, so they are targeted as well. So there's a very, very big systematic discrimination, erasure of women from social and public life. And as well as that, and unfortunately, as I mentioned, the ripple effects go down to women as well. Since the Taliban overtook the country, there's been over 90 decrees against women. These decrees, including business employment, women in media, movement restrictions, as I mentioned, even visiting parks and sightseeing, banning sports, particularly here in Canberra, we have the Afghan women's cricket team who recently played their game, and then the Afghan women's soccer team who are now in Melbourne as well. These groups have left Afghanistan, and you can see the impacts of how they are so culturally so tied to such a beautiful place of what it was once before, but now facing so much restrictions. But the mental health crisis in Afghanistan is very, very strong because of the banning for women to stay inside their homes, not be educated, and leaving all of the many, many years of hard work that they did throughout the years, all of it down the drain. So the mental health is very, very is a very, very big problem there. And now that we see the Trump administration that has announced a backfall, a decrease, taking back and deleting multiple aid programs, we can see the impacts of that in Afghanistan. We will see the impacts of that much more. Afghanistan relies very much on foreign aid. More than half of Afghanistan's population of 43 million people is dependent on international aid for their survival. So I think one thing to note there as well is, despite there's so many structural issues as well, building local capacities is very important, which I'm keen to discuss the ways that locals have the capacities, how women have the capacities, but they need to be provided the opportunities. And when given the chance, they run for it. They really, really make use of that. So we have a loss of talent. We have a depletion of a full country of talent, of knowledge that has been completely depleted of the country. So we can see we'll see the impacts of that in many more years to come.
And the decrees, how many decrees on the list of what women can't do?
So far, I think there's more than 90. I've written 85, but I'm pretty sure there's more than 90. Some of them is the employment of NGOs, so women being employed in NGOs and the UN. So building businesses, not allowed to build businesses. Women in media, we know initially in journalism, for example, they were told women were told to cover up. Some women decided to cover up and they wanted to continue their work. So they made a very, very brave decision and said, yes, we're going to cover up to continue our work. Those are the women newsreaders. Majority of them, though, have been targeted. Those women who are on the face in the media in Afghanistan, it's very restricted, limited time that they are on air, able to speak about certain things. The access to stories is a problem. So, so that's another big, a downfall for women in media. Movement restriction as well. So when women aren't allowed to go outside of the house without a mahram. So a mahram is basically a male guardian, somebody who will take them to the shops, to take them to wherever they need to go, which is mainly just the shops and anything necessary for healthcare. Healthcare is another big concern as well.
Men have to sit in now.
So men actually in the appointments, I'm not sure if they need to sit in with the women. I know many cases they do. I'm not sure that's a rule. But in terms of taking their sisters, their mothers, their aunties to the place, there needs to be a male guardian, which is really interesting that I'll touch on a bit later about the ways that women creatively use that restriction to their benefit. So it's an interesting point which I'll come to later.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hanna, Russia's war on Ukraine has had a devastating impact on the entire country, on the men, the women, the boys and the girls. And since February 2022, many men have left their regular jobs to join the military, which has resulted in a skilled workers shortage of around 60,000 people. And women have been upskilling to fill those gaps. Now, in March last year, CNN reported that 62,000 women were serving in Ukraine's armed forces, with more than 5,000 women serving in combat roles. Can you please discuss how women have been contributing to the war efforts, both in the military and in the broader economy, and the social impact or response to increased female military service?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question and thank you for having me. I feel very honored to be here, and as much as I came here to talk about Ukraine, I'm also here to listen and learn from my co-panelists from North, Aryana and Elaine. As per the question, I actually would like to start by thanking you for the correct use of the term. This is Russia's war against Ukraine, not war in Ukraine or Ukrainian conflict. I firmly believe that language has the power to shape our perception of reality. And so moving on to the question, there is a lot to tell, so I'll try to stick to my notes, not to take over the time. As for women's contribution to the war efforts, firstly, as of July last year, there have been more than 67,000 women in the Ukrainian armed forces. This number has been growing steadily since the beginning of the full-scale war. What is important to mention is that the legal ban for women to occupy combat positions was only lifted in 2018. And that happened due to advocacy work by civil society in cooperation with some researchers that resulted in a movement called Invisible Battalion. Secondly, women have historically been the backbone of social reproduction of life in a broad sense. And because of the full-scale invasion, more than 11 million people have been displaced, which constitutes approximately a third part of the Ukrainian population. Most of these people are women with dependents, meaning children and elderly. which has resulted in women increasingly taking over the role of the head of the household, having to take care of the budget of the family. If the family has been displaced, then looking for job opportunities, schools and kindergartens for the children, adjusting to the new place of living, quite often taking care of matters related to medical care of wounded family members, often servicemen and women. Informal network of support, which has been crucial, especially at the beginning of the full-scale war when the humanitarian efforts specifically depended on the local communities and women-led organizations. Thirdly, women and feminist movement more broadly has performed advocacy work and influenced gender-responsive policymaking in Ukraine. One example is work on promoting WPS agenda, Women, Peace and Security agenda. At the time of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine was implementing its second national action plan, and it was because of the civil society that the idea to update the National Action Plan took place. The update of the National Action Plan was needed to be more responsive to war-related challenges. Some of them included increased number of combat-related sexual violence cases, which is wartime rape, increased number of people living under temporary occupation in need of humanitarian support, increased number of women in the military, as already mentioned, and basically availability of bomb shelters, right, all across the country. Another example is advocacy related to adoption of or ratification of Istanbul Convention targeting domestic violence. This has been a result of long-term advocacy of civil society. And well, another example is later this month, there will be the 69th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, CSW, which will ironically take place in the US. And to my knowledge, quite a few delegations of feminists from Ukraine will take part in that meeting. There is a lot more to mention, such as successful fight against harassment in universities, which is something that Ukrainian feminists have been doing throughout the whole period of the full-scale war. Renaming the streets with women's toponyms, like naming them after famous women in history, promoting sexual education in school, all during the times of the full-scale war. These are just few examples that illustrate the agency of women, which essentially the resolution 1355 is about. I can keep going, but I think I'll stop here.
Okay, not boring at all. Elaine, you've spent much of your career covering human rights, most recently with a particular focus on Asia and many locations that don't desperately seek, don't attract desperately needed political and media attention. So can you please discuss some of the current trends you're seeing in human rights and also women's rights specifically across the region?
Yeah, thanks so much. And it's wonderful to see so many people here for this event. I mean, in terms of broad trends, I think that we're seeing across Asia, we're particularly concerned about rising authoritarianism, the shrinking space for civil society, for independent media in many of the countries where we work, the weakening of democratic institutions, whether it's, through the courts, through attacks on political opposition members, attacks on human rights defenders, in many, many countries across the region where we work. But I think, and we're all here at a time where we're looking at what's happening in the world and we're seeing the rules-based order, sometimes feels like it's being burnt down right in front of our very eyes. And yet I think of the last year in Asia, and I think ordinary people across that region, they recognize the importance of human rights and they're prepared to put their lives on the line for that. And I'll give a few examples. South Korea, for instance. I didn't expect this past year, that the South Korean president would declare martial law. And yet you had ordinary South Koreans get out of bed in the middle of the night, in the cold, and they all went to the parliament and they stood up for their rights. And within hours, that order was rescinded. Within days, he was impeached. And within weeks, he was arrested. And it's not been easy in South Korea. And I mean, I've spoken to South Korean journalists who say, I'm ashamed that this has happened. But I also think this is one of the rare cases where actually the protest movements, the checks and balances, they worked actually to prevent this abuse of power. And places like Myanmar, places like Hong Kong, we've seen that abuse of authority. And unfortunately, we haven't had that result. And then Bangladesh is the other example that I wanted to mention. And in August of last year, you had student-led protests, and women was such a crucial part of that protest movement. It's the first time actually in Bangladesh that there has been so many women organising. These are university students who were really saying, we need to take this to the streets. And they were successful, actually, in overthrowing an authoritarian leader, Sheikh Hosseini, who had ruled that country in an increasingly authoritarian way for the past 15 years. And I visited Bangladesh just last month, and I had a meeting with a number of these female student leaders. And they said, we were so proud, actually, of everything that we achieved, because in this country, the patriarchy is very strong and women's voices are not being heard. But we felt like our voices really made a difference. Now, we're in this period where it's an interim government, and I think the interim government is trying to sort of chart Bangladesh in a rights-respecting way, but they're up against a lot of challenges, frankly, with the police, with the military, and with the entrenched political parties. So, the students have actually just last week, they've formed their own political party, which, is really impressive. And they're saying, we want to be a part of this future. And so I think supporting these grassroots efforts by women, who are really sort of reclaiming the space, even in difficult places like Bangladesh, where it's very hard for them to have a voice, is something very inspiring for all of us.
And are the women, now that they've in a way been empowered, have they been mobilising politically? So
as part of this effort to form a new student-led political party, so it's not only women, it's also it's students.
Yes.
But it's partly because they were also just so dissatisfied with the existing political parties. And so, Bangladesh, it is kind of interesting that, Sheikh Hosseini was a woman who was leading that country, and the other leader of the BNP previously had also been a woman. But they felt like after the protests, within the political parties, those entrenched structures really put in place a lot of men. And they were like, well, thanks, for your effort in the revolution, but now we've got this, just leave it to us. And so what I found, really amazing was that, no, they've actually started organising at the grassroots level. So there's an organisation called She Leads, and they really want to learn. Like, they want to learn from women in other places who have also had to fight these battles, in places like Sri Lanka too, which just had an election last year and where the incumbent parties didn't win. So I think there is, at this moment, there's a lot of appetite for real change, and I think it remains to be seen how that will play out. But I am hopeful that, perhaps women will have a larger voice going forwards in places like Bangladesh.
The call to action list for everyone is growing. Okay, now this question is to Nos and Aryana. You've both talked us through the current human rights situations in Iran and Afghanistan, and I'd now like to focus on how women are responding. You've sort of touched a little bit on that, particularly the students and particularly the male students. But there's many inspiring stories of women in both Iran and Afghanistan, and in the diaspora communities as well, where they're advocating for human rights, they're pushing back against oppression in really, extraordinary degrees of bravery and courage in the face of such adversity and hostility and violence. So, Nos, I might come to you first if you can talk us through how the women and men in Iran continue to advocate for human rights in the face of state oppression, and then I'll go to Aryana. You touched on it briefly in terms of the students, but what else is going on?
Sure. So a woman by the name of Sohaila, she's an actress. She was actually in the recent movie, The Sacred Fig, which was nominated for an Oscar. And because of her role in that movie, she's facing 74 lashes, and she's also facing a term of imprisonment. And women like that who are risking themselves and using their art form to tell the story of repression and to tell the story of harassment are quite inspiring. There are countless examples of women who have bravely stood up to this regime. There are women who were shot in the eye, who managed to escape Iran and have been resettled in places like Italy. And they're taking up the fight and using their story, using their experience to make sure that the world knows what they've been through, and so that the world knows what women continue to go through. One of the sort of policies of the armed forces and the Iranian authorities was to target women in amongst the protesters that they found attractive. And they were tasked with the role of blinding them in the eye by deliberately shooting them in the eye or by shooting them in the genitals. And when they arrested these women and took them away, they again picked the woman that would be the most satisfying in terms of their appetite, and they would subject them to unimaginable and horrific types of assault. And these women resisted. They're quite brave, they're quite courageous, and they're still continuing to fight. Women like Mahsa Alinejad, who is a journalist she's currently based in the United States. She faced many abduction. She was going to be abducted and taken back to Iran. Yet she still stands up and fights for the Iranian women and the Iranian people. And the FBI had to actually move her to a safe house because she took the risk of speaking out for women in a relatively safe place. You'd think that you can speak up against repressive regimes outside your country of origin, but unfortunately you can't. It's very hard. I mean, you can, but obviously there's severe risks. And we within the diaspora community are doing what we can to shed light on the human rights violations that go on inside our country of birth. And in response, family members of ours are targeted. Family members are arrested, they're interrogated, they're taken away. People who go back to the country are shown photos of protesters here in Melbourne. This one woman who is based in Geelong contacted me not long ago and said that her 14-year-old son was taken away for questioning by the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, who the Iranian diaspora around the world is calling for them to be prescribed as a terrorist organisation. They took him away and chained him to a chair and said, "Call your mother right now, put her on speaker. We want to hear why she protested against us." And he was shown a collection of photos that show all the activists here in Melbourne, and his mother was pointed out to him. And she was put into a really horrible situation where she knew that they had her son, and she had to backtrack and say, "Oh no, I know that Mahsa Amini was not killed by the morality police and by the Iranian authorities, that it was a heart attack," and so on. And that's the sort of misinformation that we're up against. She was, based on witness testimony, fatally assaulted. They took her away because of a dress code infraction. She didn't wear her headscarf properly. She was taken away. She was beaten the whole way to the re-education facility. And she continued to be struck on the head. And she fell into a coma and passed away. And the journalists that broke the story, Nilufar Hamidi is one of them, were imprisoned for over, I'd say, the 18 months or so, because they did their job as a journalist and wanted to ensure that the world outside knows what's going on. We had young people taking to social media just to tell us what's going on, to tell us about the reality of their lives. And what we saw coming out of Iran was only 10% of the reality of what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So in their stories, we see resilience, we see courage, we see hope, we see bravery. And it's just inspiring. And that's why we do what we can from outside in the relative safety of our countries, such as Australia, to cast some light on what goes on over there.
Well, thank you. Aryana.
So I think similar to what there's so many really powerful stories that come out of Iran, Afghanistan, Ukraine, so many powerful stories that it's really important to kind of to shed light on, because it makes us realize we are so similar to them. We are so similar. I could have been a girl inside of Afghanistan experiencing a completely different life. The fact that I'm here, so grateful for being here, so blessed, the opportunities that are here. And so these stories really humanize the situation over there. Millions and millions of girls and women are experiencing types of oppression that I hope any of us here experience. No one anyone should experience, really. But they are up against such tough structures that if you really understand that, it changes your whole entire worldview. It transforms your perceptions of the ways that these girls are actually able to resist. Even going outside of their homes and going shopping is a form of resistance. Even waking up in the morning is a form of resistance. Eating, speaking with, mobilizing, speaking with other women and saying, hey, this is, what do we do? That is a form of resistance. Putting, I guess the beauty salons were also banned in Afghanistan. Beauties are, so that was, I think that was last year or so. So these small things that we think are quite small, they are massive in the eyes of women who literally going outside, taking one step outside of their home is a form of danger. Physical danger. And so we see resistance needs to be understood not in a passive sense. It needs to be understood in a very transformational sense, in a very active, transformatory and revolutionary sense. I think our understanding of resistance in the ways that we see how women are, protesting, we see that yes, that's a very strong form of resistance, but truly understanding it is another point. Diaspora is a very big support here. I was born here and raised here, so I come from a place of understanding. I come from a place that I'm very connected with Afghan culture. I've grown up with the similar values, so I understand the Afghan cause very, very deeply. So my level of, empathy and connection goes deeper in that sense. But we even saw stories at the very first day of the overtaking when on August 15th on 2021, when women took to the streets. When they went outside, they mobilized, they grabbed groups of women marching along the streets.
Yes, yeah.
And there was a video that I had only recently in my PhD come across, a person that I was interviewing. We see those images on the news. A person that I was interviewing for my PhD, he sent me the exact video of the woman who was mobilizing. I interviewed the actual woman who, on the first day of the overtaking, took to the streets and initiated the protest. And the man that was filming the women marching along the street, they were holding signs, they were walking together. Many men in the group of Taliban had come up to them with, the big guns with bullets that were chained around their bodies. These women were they just kept on going. They kept on going. They kept on chanting. The Taliban came to their face. They kept on going. This form of resistance is phenomenal. But when, as I saw in the behind the scenes, that the man that was filming that video, he was scared himself. He ran away when he saw the Taliban, but the woman kept on going.
Wow.
So we can see here the way that fear can really shape and change people's behavior, but also how women are so resolute in going, in being so straightforward with what they feel is right. Rights in Afghanistan, it is very different to other countries as well. So a women's understanding of rights and what they feel is what they need is different to women in Australia, to women in South Korea, but there is a sense that those basic and fundamental and essential rights are very, very needed, and that's what they're advocating for. Women are in diaspora, they're documenting human rights violations, they're forming global committees, they are getting the information that they need to spread awareness around the world. Women inside the country, they are writing poetry, they are creating art, they are writing stories, they're learning languages online. They're doing whatever they can with the restrictions on education, they're doing things online now. So at first, the initial resistance in Afghanistan was very overt, was very strong. Later on, now we see hidden forms of resistance and alternative forms where they're going online, protecting themselves and their identities in order to continue to do the work that they are doing. Human rights defenders are navigating layers and layers of challenges, navigating to be able to do their work, even being protected in outside countries as well. But one thing with women's resistance in Afghanistan is women in Afghanistan have resisted throughout history. So it's not just within after the Taliban overtaking, after 2021, that we see this surge of resistance. We see a lot of media attention, but they have been resisting throughout history for hundreds of years. Their resistance is very, very central to the way that Afghanistan has been shaped as a country as well. In 1979, during the after Soviet occupation, the Revolutionary Association of Women of Afghanistan, ROA, that became very more directly involved with resistance there. I guess one thing to mention here is women are resisting not just what is happening inside of Afghanistan. They're resisting multiple fronts. Inside of Afghanistan, there's a resistance against what the Taliban imposing, I guess, a lack of education and just basic essential rights. But there's also the resistance against the ideas of religion that the Taliban are purporting. So the Taliban are saying religion as a sort of way that women are not allowed. They're not allowed to learn. They're women. They're supposed to be staying inside the home. Their role is to be a family caretaker. I mean, we're living in such a different day and age, but that rhetoric is still there. So their understanding of religion and their push of religion is very particular. Women are resisting against that, but they are also resisting against the ways that religion has been dehumanized and I guess we can see a lot of Islamophobia because of that as well. So that's an important point, that the way that they purport religion to be is not necessarily the way that women in Afghanistan see gender equality in Islam. The way that the Taliban is preaching religion is not the religion that is similar to other people, and what religion is, what Islam is.
Okay, great.
There's so much.
There's a lot there, but in terms of the resistance and this civilian resistance, and resistance comes, as you've highlighted, Aryana, in many forms. So you've outlined how the women in Ukraine are supporting the war effort and particularly in combat roles. But at that civilian level, there's one such group called the Angry Mavkas. That's an exclusively female group with the goal of pushing back against Russian aggression and sexual assault. The group was it's got some media coverage, and it's been inundated with requests from women and girls across the occupied territories to contribute to their cause. Can you talk us through very briefly what these civilian networks and resistance networks are doing, particularly the fabulous Angry Mavkas, and the important role that women are playing in these networks?
Yes. Let me compliment the work of the organizing team for preparing the questions and doing the research. Frankly speaking, I don't think I have to add much on Angry Mavkas, much to what has already been said, but I know where you take it from there. We already talk about how Russian war against Ukraine is gendered, but what hasn't been mentioned yet, that this war is also a war on gender. While preparing for the 8th of March, the committee in Ukraine has shared a draft of a letter addressed to the International Red Cross, asking them to help Ukraine convince Russia to share the numbers of women that they held captive. This includes military women and civilians as well. And just for the context, holding civilians captive is a war crime. The numbers we have are estimates, right, based on the personal research, right? People looking for their relatives or friends or co-workers, so they're not precise. Approximately 5 months ago, that was in October, maybe 6 months ago, we learned that a Ukrainian journalist, Victoria Roshchina, who went to the occupied territory occupied by Russia, and went missing, was declared dead in Russian captivity. And up to this date, her body hasn't been returned to Ukraine. But through some investigation, it was we got to know that she was tortured. And by the time that she died, at the age of 28, being a healthy woman, when she went to the trip, she weighed 30 kilos. So where I want to take us from here is to say that it's just like one story, one instance, but in the territories occupied by Russia, active civilians, people who are openly feminist, people who are part of LGBTQI community are particularly targeted, right? In the speech preceding the full-scale invasion, Putin specifically outlined that this is a war for traditional values, as opposed to what he called the degraded West, embodied by Ukraine. In this speech, in the following speeches, Putin essentially promoted an alternative project of modernity, of how things should be. And this project is rooted in illiberal gender order, as opposed to Western liberal order of gender equalities. And so I'm taking it somewhere to an important point. I believe that the recent warming of relationships between US and Russia, they need to be seen beyond economic interests in Ukrainian mineral resources, in its territories and people. It needs to be seen as based on complementary political projects aimed at restoring the so-called greatness of the past, right? Moving on to Trump. His presidency started with the project of complete restoration of America. That's a quote. The first day into his presidency, he signed a number of executive orders of apparently high priority, one of which cemented male and female as the only two genders in an act of protecting women from the so-called gender ideology extremism. It's also a quote. And in such a way, he aligned himself with broader movement against progressive gender norms, prominently represented by Russia. But apparently not only Russia, right? Why does this matter? Why do I talk about this? Such alternative projects of modernity seek expansion to gain legitimacy, right? They do not respect borders, and as it has been demonstrated by Russia, they might be mobilized to justify wars. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, thanks. And that's a nice segue into this final question I'll give to Elaine before we cross to questions from the floor. So, as we know, the US has for so long been a global beacon for democracy and human rights, and has in many ways led the way in the protection and promotion of human rights across the globe. Now, one of the ways it's done this is through international aid programs, and I'd just be interested, I won't get into this, I might wrap up later, but just this question's to Elaine, and if you just might have some comments on it, very brief ones, Hanna, because I do want to cross to questions from the floor. But as we know, the Trump administration has frozen US aid programs to conduct a review, and we're of course waiting to see the outcome of that review, but the freeze has already had an impact in so many ways on many organisations delivering healthcare, delivering food and education. So a decrease in our US aid leaves a significant gap, and I suppose the question remains, who will fill that gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Should the review result in long-term cuts?
Yeah, I think the damage done is breathtaking, and I think we're not sure whether or how much of the money will be reinstated. And so many of our partner organisations, and I should say Human Rights Watch does not take any government money, so we ourselves are not affected by these cuts, but many of our partner organisations that we work with on the ground in different countries are affected, and some of them are now facing an existential threat to their very existence. These are organisations that do, the really hard yards of monitoring in difficult places, like China, like North Korea, like Afghanistan, like Myanmar, like Iran. And we're really worried, actually, about that. So it's a time for other governments to step up. On Afghanistan, because we were talking, earlier about the impact of the cuts, we talked a bit about, the threats to women's education. Well, actually, there were online university courses being made available to Afghan women that was funded by the US, accredited courses. Those have now stopped. Maternal health clinics, hundreds of clinics have been closed across Afghanistan. Now, that's some of the only health clinics that people had access to, now shut down. So huge impacts. I mean, I think for this region, obviously a government like Australia is not going to be able to fill that huge gap, but I do think there needs to be a reprioritization of aid to look at particularly issues in this region. And I think Australia, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand really need to step up in this region and think about, particularly I think some of these organizations that, are really at risk and are at threat, but then broader than that, also just the health crisis that we're facing. I mean, the PEPFAR, which is the HIV, malaria and TB support that was being provided by the US, that was meant to have a waiver, but the waivers aren't working because everyone's been fired in Washington. So, there's no one there to even process the payments or to issue the waivers. And so it's complete chaos in Washington. And this means that, people are not getting the drugs that they need. Pregnant mothers who are HIV positive are not getting the drugs they need. They may be passing on HIV to their babies. And in fact, the UN recently said that if this is not reversed, we're looking at potentially 6 million more HIV infections globally. So the ramifications are huge. They will affect all of us wherever we are in the world. And, this is certainly not to give the Trump administration a free pass in any way, but I think now is a time for governments to think about the impacts of this and where they can step up.
Yeah, and which just top of head, top of mind, which areas should we focus on?
Health, these health clinics
Maternal
that
health,
have been closed, particularly
generally,
maternal health, but also, frankly, also in refugee camps in Bangladesh, the Rohingya refugee camps. Hospitals have been closed. In Thailand, on the Myanmar border, I mean, many of them had relied on health clinics that had been previously provided by USAID funding, funded, through the International Rescue Committee and otherwise. But also the civil society. So particularly the monitoring of human rights violations, because we need that information. Even organizations like Human Rights Watch, we don't have access on the ground in countries where we should be, in Afghanistan, in Iran, in Myanmar, in China. And so there are very brave people doing very difficult work and doing that, monitoring of information. So we want to ensure that work continues, and particularly the independent media houses that also report on a lot of these issues in countries where there have been huge threats to journalists and to the media, and people have been locked up.
Okay, thank you. Now, I've got one more question, but I'll ask that at the end. But before we get His Excellency to do the concluding remarks, but if we could just go to 2-3 questions here in the audience. I haven't got any online. With just some mics here. Yes.
Hi.
If you could stand up and just say your name, organisation, and also direct your question just to one of the panellists, please, just in the interest of time.
Hi, I'm Ria. I'm from Department of Defense. Just a question for Aryana or Nos regarding the treatment of women in the Middle East. Just putting on the religions or cultural lens, just want to know the stance of the countries in the Middle East towards the treatment of women, and what kind of activities is happening in this country. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. So your question was about the way that women are treated in the Middle East. The solidarities and forms. Yeah, I think so just briefly, Afghanistan is part of Central Asia, not the Middle East, so a bit of a differentiation there. But we see some solidarity and I guess strong networks that are being formed in regional countries. So Afghan women, Iranian women in Tajikistan, they've kind of come together to really, because they have similar experiences and similar views of what their rights need to be. So there is strong solidarity there. From the, I guess, the Middle East perspective of the way that women are treated, it differs. Every family is different, every area is different, culture and religion changes over time. The perpetuation of certain ways of practicing religion in the media can kind of, I guess, dehumanize sometimes what happens on the ground. So, for example, women in Afghanistan, I mean, they just want a simple life. They want their husbands to come home safe. They want their children to be educated. They want work. They want freedoms. They want to be able to wear what they want. They want to dress up without the attention, unwanted attention of men. So it's really basic and essential rights that they are wanting. And yeah, it is. So there is a good, I guess, understanding between women across the Middle East. Then there are other women who are happy with the ways that the Taliban is purporting those rules. So there is a minority, but there is a group that's saying, we believe in what the Taliban are putting these policies and rules in place because that is protecting us from certain ideas and from harm. So it is a minority, but it exists, and so we that definitely exists there. But a thing to understand with the women who do, who are for the Taliban, there's an intersectionality of experiences. So women who are socioeconomically in more economically rich areas, who see the benefits of the Taliban regime, they are, I guess, for the regime, for the rules, and others who actually are in the humanitarian space, having to navigate with the authoritarian regime, they have to be in contact with them as well. So there is solidarity, but there is fragmentation in the movement and across the Middle East.
Yeah.
So there is fragmentation.
Great, thank you. Yes, just.
Hi, my name is Jay. I don't know who the best person to answer this question is, but we talked a little bit about the targeting of diaspora journalists, diaspora activists here in Australia. Is the Australian government able to do more to protect activists on our own soil, and what can be done?
I think, Nelson, you might answer that one because you touched on it in your presentation. Yeah.
I can also add something.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, after you.
Yep.
So I came to Australia in 1989 as a refugee with my family, and since coming here, we have been targeted by agents of the Iranian regime and supporters of the Iranian regime as well. I was abducted from school when I was 5 or 6 years old by a man who made out that my dad had sent him to pick me up from school, which was not the case. And when he took me home, he told my mum and dad, who were waiting for me in shock and total disbelief, that they need to stop their political activities and they need to stop speaking out against this regime. I received threatening letters in the mail. I received death threats. A decapitated animal was left on my parents' doorstep, and our family in Iran, after being interrogated, were told, this is a warning to your family. Did they like that little present that we left for them? So these are just some examples. I know that it's not, I know they're not very serious examples, but they're just some examples of the way.
I mean, did the police get involved just very quickly?
Well, yes, they did.
Okay,
we have reported it, but I guess...
I'd like to know that the police got involved.
I guess I'm downplaying it because I know that people in Iran who are on the streets facing rape as a weapon, who are being targeted, who are being arrested, who are being executed, they're dealing with the serious consequences of speaking out. So I'm happy to just cop what we're copying because it's not what they're facing. Yeah. So that's why I say it's not very serious. But we saw a huge increase in the number of Iranians here in Australia who were calling the National Security Hotline and reporting that they had been followed or that their cars had been vandalised. And this includes people who were actively organising protests. Their cars were being tampered with. Or members of their families. There's this one particular protest organiser by the name of Masood. His mother in Iran, who is a psychiatrist, I believe, her clinic was raided and they scrubbed all the security footage and she was put into prison for 2 months. And she was told, you're here because your son is organising protests in Australia. So that monitoring is real. And the surveillance is real. And members of the Iranian community who have gone back to Iran have been shown photos of me and my family at the airport when they've been taken away for questioning. The founder of the Revolutionary Guards and a former presidential candidate published a photo of me on his website along with an article that I was quoted in by The Australian. So the monitoring is real, and they do what they can to silence us, but it's not going to work.
Yep, great. Elaine, just quickly.
So transnational repression is on the rise globally, and certainly it's something that Human Rights Watch has looked into, including here in Australia. We do have a new Foreign Interference Act, which criminalises the harassment and intimidation of Australians on Australian soil. The difficulty is often getting the proof, because often it's threats against family members back in the home country and effectively using those family members as hostages. So, I think one thing that the government really needs to do is to invest more in police who have good contacts with diaspora, who speak different languages, Chinese, speaking Farsi, speaking different languages of the communities who are at threat, because this is happening a lot and it's getting worse. And I think governments are feeling emboldened and entitled because they feel like it works to silence criticism that can't happen in the country if they can silence it abroad.
Yep, great. Thanks, Elaine, and thanks for sharing that. That would have been tough. So thank you. I am very conscious of time, so just one last question before I hand over to His Excellency. So we've heard these messages of resilience, of resistance, of incredible bravery and courage from women and men throughout the world against this violence and repression. So we're going to be celebrating the 25th anniversary of UNSCR 1325 at the end of the year. What's one practical and positive thing a government or an individual or civil society, politicians, what's the call to action to everyone in this group tonight? One item each. We start with you, Elaine.
So on Afghanistan, I would say support an effort for an investigative mechanism at the Human Rights Council to collect and preserve evidence of human rights violations. This would be in addition to the Special Rapporteur. It's something that is being considered, I believe, including by the European Union and many other governments. And it is something that the UN Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan himself has called for. So I think that's something that governments, including Australia, can really get behind.
Great. Hanna.
Yeah, it's for the increased financial military support of Ukraine, because if we fail Ukraine now, it will have far-reaching consequences for the global democracy and gender equality.
Aryana.
I think on a, individual level, there's so much the government really can do, including aid, to provide more aid. On an individual level, I think connecting with grassroots women organisations who are working to protect their women, their communities, really practical things to support those groups, getting in contact with women in diaspora who are connected with those and supporting the work that is on the ground. I think we can see some really daily, really strong change when we see that in practice.
And how do they do that? Is there a website you can refer them to?
We have connections, I think so. I think connecting with the right, myself or other researchers who are, in contact with those women, there is definitely some group funding that is happening around. Mahbouba Siraj's, for example. So there's many other initiatives happening.
So connect with you on socials.
Okay, basically.
I think that we need, this is what I think female activists go on about quite a lot, because it's something that we're not seeing in every sphere. But I think we need more women in positions of power, in leadership positions. In Iran, for instance, we've never seen a female president or a female judge, because women aren't allowed to be in those positions of power. And I think that if we do have more women taking on those roles, we'll see far better improvements, far more improvements for people everywhere, not just women.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. As a long list of things for you as well to do. Thank you. Jos, Aryana, Hanna, Elaine, fantastic panel. It now gives me pleasure to introduce His Excellency, the EU Ambassador, Gabriel Vicentin.
Thank you.
Do you want to stand here, sit,
Any way.
to make some concluding remarks? Thank you again for partnering with ASPI for this very special event for International Women's Day and International Women's Week. And we look forward to your concluding remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here tonight, but thank you for moderating in such a fantastic way. But above all, thanks again to these 4 fantastic panelists. Can I have another round of applause, please? The living evidence of what future role models or even present role models are. So thank you very much for being here and for your testimony. I will be rather short. I had sort of a pre-prepared speech, which I will not read. Because I'm conscious that there is a networking cocktail and food waiting for you, so I will be very quick on that. No, but I have a couple of points that I would really like to raise. So this is our second year of partnership with ASPI on Women's Day, which I would really like to continue. It's a small, still very important testimony and evidence of the importance that the EU attaches to women empowerment and to Women's Day. We, as EU, allow me to say, set the standards. We are a role model in terms of organization and bloc in terms of promotion of women's rights. Within the EU, it's law, equal pay. It's law, non-violence against women. It's law, minimum number of women in boards. It's law, minimum number of managers in the EU institutions. So we mean what we say, and we say what we mean. Inside the EU, because we can be a role model for our international partners only and if we set the example, and we do. And when we talk about role models, and I would like to maybe comment on what's happening in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Ukraine. I don't have time, but I would like to refer to what is happening in Europe now regarding with Ukraine. We are living in an existential threat. And actually, the strongest, clearest, boldest voices on what we have to do come from 3 women in these days in Europe. The Danish Prime Minister, Frederiksen, who says that if we don't act within 2 months, Europe will not have the deterrence or the autonomy to face Russian invasions and to be independent. We have the High Representative for Foreign Policy, Kallas, who says that there is no moral leader anymore in the West. We need a new leader in the West. And finally, we have the President of the European Commission, von der Leyen, who presented yesterday an incredibly bold Rearm Europe plan, 800 million euros, which is 1.3 trillion Australian, precisely to allow Europe to go on living what it is, a self-standing democracy bloc. So it's good to see that it's women who come and talk about money and weapons and arms, and how to defend their lives, their children, their husbands, their brothers, their sisters. So these are the kind of role models we want. It's not women don't cry on themselves. They act. Look what you said, what they do in Iran, what they do in Afghanistan, what they do in Ukraine. I mean, in Ukraine, you had men fighting, getting ready to fight the Russians out of Kiev at the beginning, in the first days of the war, and women were home preparing Molotov bombs that they were then bringing to their men on the front. No, but this is what I mean. This is what I mean. This is a kind of evidence that women are strong, are not, people to be protected. On the contrary, they just have to be empowered and enhanced. Yeah. This is the message. It's not, there's no weakness in women, there's just strength. And there are thousands of years of cultural, limitations that are put on them. But it's just the strongest part of our society, I would say. I was saying that we need role models, because it's through role models that we empower the girls to see that they can go up the ladder, they can be what they want and do what they want. So I'm really happy to see so many young girls here. I'm sure you will be the next leaders, the leaders of the future in whatever you want to do in your field. So great that you're here and you hear about these kind of things. But role models does not necessarily mean that you have to be the number one. You can be the number 100, and in your environment you have to be a role model. You don't. I just mentioned President of the Commission of Prime Ministers, but you can be a role model wherever you are in any job you do, or in any framework you act or speak. So that's important to know that the testimony you give is regardless of where you are. You do it anywhere and anyway. Sorry, I need glasses because I cannot read my own handwriting. Yes, it's role model. Last year, you probably remember, I said that we were talking about women in diplomacy, and I referred to Rafaela, who was the EU chargé in Afghanistan, in Kabul. She was the head of the EU office in Kabul. Mind you, the EU is the only international presence in Kabul. And we sent a woman. She was the head of our office. She was the one talking to the Taliban. She was the one buying copybooks, pens, and going to the girls and organizing in caves, schools where they could be educated. She was the one going to the jails and taking out prisoners and sending them overnight through the border of Pakistan so that they could be flown back to Europe. Because we, the EU delegation in Kabul, made sure that we evacuated all the Afghans who worked for us, including their families, in order for them not to be persecuted or killed by the Taliban. And it's thanks to the work that Rafaela did that we were able to deliver on that. You can avoid clapping, but there is a huge clap that you should do, because this is ethical, and we did it. And not many other Western embassies did what we did. And it was great. And our member states also gave asylum to all these more than 850 Afghans that we evacuated like that. And it's thanks to the work of Rafaela. So Rafaela she died of a stroke on the 27th of December this year. She was not just a fantastic person and a personal friend, but she was exactly the kind of role model of powerful woman who that we all want to admire and take inspiration from. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency, and Vale Rafaela. What an extraordinary woman. What an extraordinary woman, and what a tragic. How old was she when she passed?
How old?
Yeah.
Do we have to say how old she was?
No, she looks relatively young. So
no, she was not. She was not even 60.
Yeah.
And actually, we are trying to organize a major event to commemorate her, because one of her daughters is studying at Adelaide University. So we will try to do something celebrating her and her legacy. But you can Google her. There is a very nice interview of hers in the United States when she was talking about the Afghani women. And she said that the best thing that we can do to an Afghani woman is not to pity her, but to respect her and cherish her for her courage. And I think this is what we could do for every woman around. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you everyone for